This is how I love my neighbor as myself. People with the least pay the most for their electricity. I love me some solar tax credits. We got a lot of hustle because it's not energy if it's not an acronym. We are just operating in an extraordinary environment of abundance that is nothing like I've experienced in my 30 years in this field. You are right on time.
Yes, yes, yes. So good. Welcome back to the Eco Christian Podcast. We're exploring what it means to be Christian on planet Earth. That's where we're at. I'm your host, Caleb Cray Haynes. Y'all, about a month ago, I had the privilege of being invited to a White House faith leaders convening on climate, clean energy, and environmental justice. And there, I got to meet some wonderful people doing the work of the Lord for environmental justice around the nation. And I am sitting down with one of those people today, and you're going to get to hear from the wonderful Michelle Moore. And we're going to talk about resources for you. But real quick, before all that, I just have to acknowledge the gift of September we're having right now in Middle Tennessee. And I know that many of you, depending on where you're listening from, there's been some real weather and climate related battles going on right now. And it's, it has been actually at the end of August, it was so dry here and so hot and it was so dry. I had put a little water back in the bird bath out front, and there was a lineup of red wasps out there in the bird bath, gulping water. I've never seen anything like this. It was, and they were like, "Guys, we're saved," and it was just wild. And so, and by the way, last episode we chatted about the voices of all creatures, and I've been on a journey to figure out how to be more in harmony with the stinging creatures of God around my house in particular. It's where's the boundary there? We need these pollinators. But y'all, I got stung by a hornet, and gosh, that was some stuff, some swollen, and bees sting, and it's serious because they die. It's kind of full of glory and honor. They're like, for the queen, and it's over. But hornets and wasps, they're like the automatic weapons, and it's just, there's no honor. They're just out for a good time, and they're angry for no reason. And they're like, did you just give me a look? And then we have dirt daubers. You guys have those, mud wasp, right? They're just building their little mud houses everywhere, and they've maybe had a few too many drinks. They probably won't sting you, but they might hit you with their car. Anyway, I don't know what we're talking about right now, except that the bees are still doing their thing, but the mornings are getting cool. So it's in a really, I love this time of transition, seasonal transition that we're in right now here. Anyway, as I say, it's a wild creation out there, and we have to relearn what it means to live sustainably within it. So we are getting into this episode, the grit of the Inflation Reduction Act and what's known as direct pay. Basically, I'm asking all the questions, so you don't have to, about how your faith community, can pursue projects like solar and energy storage and get big money back free from the government, because that's a thing. You're welcome. And all you have to do is listen to this conversation, and bonus points if you give us a star rating and or Venmo me at Caleb Cray. Just kidding. You don't have to do that. I mean, you can do that, but you don't have to do that. Also, disclaimer, if you're not in the States, these resources, this conversation may obviously not be as helpful for you, but I think can still be a creative dialogue to get your wheels turning about some things. So that's up to you. All right, let's jump in because I need you guys to meet my new friend, Michelle. All right, friends, welcome to this wonderful conversation with my new friend, Michelle Moore. And so for context, we recently met at a White House faith leaders convening on climate, clean energy, and environmental justice. Like you do, just the usual meet and greet. And so we were there to learn more and to share more about the practical outcomes, particularly for houses of worship from the Inflation Reduction Act, or the IRA, as some of the folks in the biz might call it, but could get confusing. But no, the bottom line is that there are great resources available for you if you're in the States around green energy infrastructure and so forth for your church. But how do you find out about it? How do you understand it? How do you use it? Apply for it? What is it? All the things. So today, Michelle is with me. How are you, Michelle?
I am so lovely, and I am so grateful to be here with you today. Thank you so much, Caleb.
Yes, absolutely. I'm so thankful for you and your voice and taking the time to help us wrap our minds around what all this is. And so, kind of like I was saying, like so much of the work here is just actually translating this information. And it's great to have resources, but if your church doesn't know what those are and how to get them, what does it matter? and this might be groundbreaking for people to hear, but the government is not always amazing at communication. And so who's left with the responsibility to break all this down for us? So we're just going to do you guys a huge favor today and clarify some things, hopefully, or at least have a fun conversation about it. So, and I wanted to make a big disclaimer here, Michelle, that this is not my wheelhouse. And, again, I've got so much to learn from you in this topic. So be prepared for all the dumb questions. It's my spiritual gift. And... And so part of my goal here is to ask questions on behalf of all the people who are scratching their heads in sort of exhaustion because, we need to be able to access this information in practical ways. And so while I was in DC, Michelle gave a rock star presentation about her work in this intersection. So I thought, let's have a conversation for all our listeners out there because this matters. But before we get into all that, let's talk about Michelle. Give us a little bit about who Michelle Moore is and how you became CEO of Groundswell. Tell us some of your story.
Well, the first most important thing about me and why I do what I do, why I'm here, is that this is how I practice my faith. I know geeky stuff like energy and sustainability. And this is how I love my neighbor as myself. And at Groundswell, we essentially ask every day, what would our energy systems look like if they were built to love our neighbors as ourselves? And those are the kinds of projects that we try to build. But I got here, I think at the, going forward in time, it was always like the white knuckle ride from, position to position. But looking back, to me now in retrospect, it all makes sense. I'm from a small town. I'm from LaGrange, Georgia. It is and always shall be home. And it was really growing up in a small town in a community where people knew one another. A lot of people were kin and still are when I go back there today and wander through the Kroger grocery store. But it was a lot of lessons for me about taking care of one another, and about the value of community, and about the value of the natural environment, the beautiful places that we live, whether it's South Georgia, being able to grow a better tomato than anywhere else in the world, in my mind, or how much we love our forests or streams or getting out fishing or going out to the ocean. There are just so many beautiful gifts of God around us. And how do we take care of each other? How do we take care of this beautiful creation? And how do we use technology and the knowledge that's also a gift of God to do a better job of it from day to day? And that journey took me from corporate sustainability into serving in a nonprofit and the U.S. Green Building Council, into serving in the Obama White House as Chief Sustainability Officer, and to one day having the revelation, I really want to use what I know to serve people like the folks I grew up with. So here I am at Groundswell.
That is so good. That's such a good journey. I mean, just so cool. This idea of, thinking about how we use our energy as thinking about how we love our neighbor. And just connecting those dots, that's that is such the hurdle right there. And something that we should be naturally doing, though. And I love the way that you frame that. Also, how cool is that? Working in the Obama administration, on your bio it says, I'm going to read you your own accomplishments because that's not weird, but it says cutting the government's energy bill by $11 billion with a B dollars and deploying 3.2 gigawatts of new renewable energy. Wow, that's just that's so cool. I bet that was just such a treasured time for you.
It was. It was a lot of fun. It was joyful work. It was hard work, very, very hard work. But it taught me a few things. And it taught me just about how important people are, the team, because you don't get big things done unless a whole lot of people are pulling together in unity in the same direction. And you're working in the White House, in the Obama administration, and any administration, one of the most powerful tools you have is just the ability to say thank you. And to say thank you on the part of the president, to say thank you on the part of American people, and all those $11 billion in savings and all those 3.2 gigawatts of new renewable energy was about not just tens or hundreds, but thousands of people, who serve in the federal government, thousands of people who are partners, with the federal government at a local level, making stuff happen. And energy efficiency in particular, it's the least sexy tool in our clean energy toolbox. And I really appreciate all the attention and time to meticulous detail that went into cutting the federal government's energy bill by that much.
That's so good. You are embodying your values. That's in all the ways. And you're also an author, Rural Renaissance. Tell us about that a little bit.
Yes, sir. When I was in this journey and in the journey of doing this work and reflecting on having been in the field of sustainability for going on 30 years now, which freaks me out more than I can possibly describe. So much attention has gone into big cities and big companies. And I understand why, big cities and big corporations are where most of the pollution results from, because that's where the economic activity is. Those are the big machines and the big roads and the big systems. But when we think about where are the resources that create all that energy, it's in the small towns. It's in places like where I grew up. And in looking ahead at that point, I was pitching the book in 2019. What an energy transition was going to look like. What was the opportunity going to look like? How would we have the opportunity to really build into our small places in the ways in which we had been building into our big places? Yeah, I wanted to write a how-to book. And therefore, Rural Renaissance, which takes each element of a clean energy future, energy efficiency, electric vehicles, resilience, renewables, and broadband, which is absolutely necessary to a clean energy future, and talks about why from a values basis. How can we rebuild our energy systems based on some better values? And then how can we do it as a practical matter? How can we do it for our hometowns?
That's really great. I'm a rural boy myself, and and for about the last 20 years, I've been in the city, and Nashville is kind of, it's not as big of a city as other cities, but I definitely heart that. And I think, there's so much that could be said there, I guess, around valuing our rural spaces and returning to our rural spaces and investing in our rural spaces. But that's really great. Okay. Well, I'm going to link that in our show notes as well so that listeners can follow up and dig into your work in particular around that, because I think that's a great gift for us.
Well, and if anybody wants to join us, we do a conference every year, the World Renaissance Roadshow. And this year it's going to be in Macon, Georgia.
Okay.
From November the 11th through the 14th. So you can check it out at worldrenaissance.com.
Oh, man.
And actually, we invite a little piece of Nashville down with us, too. I'm also a big fan. I love American craft. And Ranger Stitch, who does, let's see, what do they do? It's chain stitch, like on antique machines. Anyway, Ranger Stitch from Nashville joins us at the roadshow.
Okay. There you
so
have
a little bit of Nashville-based American craft.
Okay, I'm feeling a road trip coming on, so that's what's up. That's coming up. Great. So let's talk about Groundswell. And Groundswell is a 501c3 nonprofit that builds community power through equitable community solar projects and resilience centers, clean energy programs that reduce energy burdens, and pioneering research initiatives that help light the way to clean energy futures for all. That's a pretty good description. Would you maybe unpack some of those pieces for us and give us kind of the picture of your work there?
So our big goal, when we talk about building community power, we really mean it in all the ways, not just in the literal sense, like with clean energy systems. We also want the investment in those clean energy systems to be driving community development and opportunities for building economic power as well. And our why, the reason we do it, is to cut energy burdens in half for families. When we look around our region, when we look around our nation, everywhere, people with the least pay the most for their electricity. And it's not because they just have it's not just math, right? It's not just because the denominator is smaller. People are paying a much larger percentage of their total household income to keep the lights on because their housing is so energy inefficient. If you're struggling to make ends meet, you're not exactly going to be investing in a new energy efficient air conditioner. You're not going to have extra dollars laying around to insulate your attic or to replace your windows. And when we're talking about high energy burdens, in some places that might be families paying 6 to 9% of their total household income for electricity, which is a lot. That's double the average for a moderate or more affluent family in America. But in a lot of rural places, people are paying 20, 30, sometimes even 40% of their total household income to keep the lights on. And when it's that much, right, that's groceries, that's medicine, that's school supplies, that's gas for the car. And a lot of the families that Groundswell works with, when it gets too hot or too cold, they're just leaving the house and going to stay with friends or family because they know they can't keep the house warm enough or cool enough to be safe and comfortable and also be able to pay the rest of their bills. So that's really our why. We want to use community solar, residential energy efficiency, energy storage to help cut those energy burdens, and in the process, help families and communities to be more resilient and to have more of an opportunity to really thrive.
That's really good. And I'm just seeing this connection once again, right, of loving particularly the least of these in our society. And I think it's really helpful what you're naming, because I think these are things that aren't maybe just common knowledge for most of us around these energy disparities that coincide with poverty and folks who might be struggling in lower socioeconomic situations, and so now, obviously, as our climate is changing more and more. I feel like we're seeing a lot of this, and you're probably seeing a lot of this in real time, particularly, in urban centers and other places as well around just how inefficient and in need these spaces are. And so it's not just pushing some green agenda or something, right, that often is accused, but you guys are particularly like saying like, no, this is about a just society, the work of love for the people of God in the world.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Love, justice, and for us, humility and the joy of service. My colleague, Crystal Virgil, really uplifts this as one of Groundswell's values. It's my favorite of Groundswell values too, although they're all good. They're all good. But I think in our society, in our culture, so often service or service jobs are seen somehow as, lower, lower class, lower on the totem pole, and, a less desirable place to be, right? But service is a privilege to be able to serve others, to be able to help others, and to be able to do that with joy in service to our fellows, our community, families, in service of the least of these is a wonderful opportunity. And it's one that we can do a whole lot with around our energy systems.
Joy is so key. What are we doing if we don't have the joy? Yes. So on to the main event a little bit of what I would like us to talk about and unpack as a resource for houses of worship. It's clear how, your work obviously makes it its business to know and understand the inner workings of the Inflation Reduction Act and these sorts of benefits for our communities, particularly direct pay, or I'm going to say elective pay, which is another just kind of synonym for this. So if folks hear that, it kind of just means direct pay, both and, from what I understand. So if we could maybe just kind of dance back and forth here, because, for us to learn about direct pay and what direct pay is, and continue kind of talking about Groundswell and you guys work there. So to break this down, I guess, for the most simplest terms for the people just sitting in the back, direct pay is about you or your church, in this instance, getting access to tax credits and rebates from the government, specifically for clean energy projects. And I'm going to put in parentheses, available through 2032, I think, currently. Is that a fair assessment?
Indeed.
So, and I put you, quote unquote, in there because there are tax credits for EV cars and, et cetera, for homeowners and so on. And so while we're kind of talking about the houses of worship space, you as an individual can follow the same sort of process of information to maybe get you some money. So that's important to sort of put in our pocket here. So when we were in DC, you shared about how Groundswell helped, particularly, I remember talking about Vickers Community Center at Community Church in Atlanta, sort of navigate this process for their solar and storage project. Yeah, I wonder if you could just kind of tell us that story, and we could just sort of maybe you could just kind of walk through that for us, and we'll get into it.
Big picture, exactly as you have said. The U.S. Department of the Treasury and the IRS in particular, which is part of the U.S. Department of the Treasury, is actually the biggest and most important agency when it comes to investing in our clean energy futures based on the IRA. And that's because tax credits play such an important role in investing in our clean energy futures. Whether we're talking about it as individuals, the EV tax credits, solar tax credits that you can get as individuals, many other tax credits. There's actually a great resource at Rewiring America. They have a great little app. You can plug in your zip code and find out lots of great information about tax credits and also rebates that are available where you live and work. And then also as institutions, like for churches and houses of worship. And to me, I love me some solar tax credits. They've helped get a whole lot of renewable energy projects built all over the country. But the reality is that as a policy tool, and when we talk about it from a values perspective, right? Think about it in terms of our values. Tax credits reward wealth with ownership, and they make everyone else pay rent. If you don't pay taxes, if you're not a taxable entity, before the Inflation Reduction Act, you had to pay somebody else to get your solar. Somebody else who had wealth, somebody else who had tax appetite, and somebody else who would take a slip of profit off of your solar panels, which meant that you would end up paying a little bit more than they would. So from an economic perspective, it was inequitable, right? There was a lack of justice in that. But the IRA created direct pay, also known as elective pay, as you observed. And what direct pay means is that as a house of worship, as a church, as a non-taxable entity, municipality, school district, nonprofit, you can go on and on, you can get paid directly for the value of those tax credits, which is huge because for solar specifically, tax credits are worth at least 30% of the total cost of the project. So if you're spending $100,000 on solar panels, you get at least $30,000 of that back as tax credits. And depending on where you're located, if you're located in a disadvantaged or environmental justice community, if you are building a community solar project that is serving your low and moderate income neighbors, if you are in an energy transition community, if you're in a community that has coal plants or that's been a coal mining community, and there are several other attributes as well, you could get what are called tax credit adders, so an additional 10%, maybe up to 50 or even 60% of the total cost of the project back as a tax credit from the federal government. It's very much like you get a personal tax return. As a church or as a community of faith, you file tax paperwork and you get that at least 30%, maybe more, of the value of your solar and, energy storage project, if you build energy storage alongside your solar, back from the federal government. So it's hugely, it's really transformational. It's such a geeky, super geeky policy, but it is so transformational in terms of making ownership of solar projects, ownership of those energy storage assets much more equitable, and helping houses of worship save a whole lot of money in the process.
Wow, that's really cool. So I was looking on the one pager, obviously reading up on this, and what I read, it says for investment in renewable energy projects, solar, wind, geothermal, it set a credit amount of 6% for baseline qualified investment, and then increases to 30% for projects smaller than 1 megawatt that meet the PWA requirements, which are prevailing wage and registered apprenticeship requirement. Is that what you were referring to when you're talking about the 30%?
Yes, absolutely. So there are, there's new guidance out that has the prevailing wage and other requirements associated with it that you mentioned. And so for bigger projects, for 1 megawatt and up, when you demonstrate, that you meet all of those requirements, then you get the full 30%. But for smaller projects, like a typical church rooftop that we work with might be 150 kilowatts or 250 kilowatts. You start out with the 30%.
Oh, okay. So it makes it sound like what you're saying is that like the 30% is more like you're probably going to qualify for that. Is that correct?
Yes, for smaller like just to give you an example, a 1 megawatt project is going to cover at least 5 acres. Oh, and okay. and so the prevailing wage and the other requirements that projects have to meet to qualify for that full 30% tax credit, those don't kick in unless the project is at least 1 megawatt or, essentially at least 5 acres.
Gotcha.
So your
So that
church
would be
rooftop,
huge.
your house of worship, you're good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, that's so interesting. So, yeah. So tell us a little bit about the story of Vickers, and maybe that'll kind of help me formulate my other questions.
Absolutely. So the Vickers Community Center is owned by the Community Church Atlanta, as you shared. And several years ago, we began a journey working with the Atlanta University Complex. So it's the area where all the HBCUs are in the city of Atlanta. And with the support of the National Renewable Energy Laboratory and our partners, Partnership for Southern Equity, Spelman, Morehouse, and want to particularly uplift my colleague Chandra Farley, who's now the Chief Sustainability and Resilience Officer of the City of Atlanta. We all started working together with the idea of building a community resiliency center that would serve the area. And what I mean by a community resilience center is a place, a central place that people go, that people trust, people feel comfortable being there, that would have solar and energy storage installed. So if there was a major power outage, you'd keep the lights on. So people could plug in their phones. So people could plug in their medical devices, like people who have oxygen concentrators and literally need electricity to live. Keep their medicine refrigerated, keep infant formula or milk refrigerated for babies. And that's something that we came together as a community and people really wanted to see. So, fast forward a few years, and one of the places that the community came together around was Vickers Community Center. And it wasn't the church that we were talking to, by the way. And this is something that to me, this is so beautiful. We find this everywhere, by the way. Groundswell doesn't exclusively work with churches and houses of worship, but I will tell you that all but one of the community resiliency centers that we have built has been on a faith-based organization or a house of worship. Why? Because they are centers of resilience. That is where people go when they need help. So it makes all the sense in the world. So anyway, so when we were talking with people in the neighborhood were like, yeah, you need to build it here. And so with those introductions, we began engaging with Community Church Atlanta about installing solar and energy storage. They provide a huge food pantry. They serve 300 to 400 families a week. It's also a gathering spot, like the Concerned Black Clergy of Atlanta gather at the Vickers Community Center, as do many other organizations. And we're just so blessed to work together. So we partnered with several other organizations, including Stryton Energy, which is a battery storage company out of Atlanta, and GM Foundation, who provided some of the funding for the project, Wells Fargo Foundation, who provided support for the finance models. But bottom line, a little earlier this year, we started construction and also finished construction on Atlanta's first community-owned resilience center. And thanks to direct pay, Community Church of Atlanta owns the solar panels. They own the battery storage, and it's saving them close to $7,000 a year on their utility bill, which they're using to expand their food pantry and to expand the other services that they provide in the community. So it's more money for the mission.
That is just so beautiful. I mean, that is just such a hopeful story, and literally an image and a place that you can go online and look at, right?
Yep.
That is now blossoming as this resilience hub in a place that really needs it. And let's be honest, all places really need this. And again, this is the kind of creative, loving your neighbor, stewardship that we need to be, really stepping forward into, I think, as churches and nonprofits and house of worship and communities. So that's really cool, man. And and I think you highlighted that again, but I want to make sure that people are understanding the importance of the difference between, right, that direct pay helps you own the system. Yes. That's a really key piece here. This is not like a rental. This is with the energy storage as well that they did in Vickers. So there's just like, in this scenario, there's just a bunch of batteries on site. Is that right?
It is. If you step behind the church, the battery array, it's about the size. So and it's enough energy storage. So the Vickers Community Center has enough batteries essentially to keep the power on for 3 days if the lights went off.
Okay.
So 3 days of powering critical systems just in case. And the size of that array, it looks about like 4 air conditioners. So it may not be as big as some people think, but all of the energy storage systems that we have constructed, they fit neatly outside, up against the facility, and they're similar in size and sort of similar in look too, if you will, to what several HVAC units would look like behind your building.
Okay. Yeah, that's really helpful to know. And are they also connected to the grid? Like if the batteries fill up, are they sort of like sending that money or sending that energy back?
They are. And interesting that you should say sending that money back too. Depending on where you're located, you can actually get a little money back on your electricity bill from your battery system too. In places like Baltimore, where we've built several resiliency centers, including with City of Refuge there, which is a faith-based institution led by Pastor Billy Humphrey. Those batteries are actually really, really useful to the utility. It helps them manage peak demand. So you get a little bit of money back for your batteries too, just like you get credit back for the solar power that you're producing.
Yeah, I didn't realize that. That's really cool. Okay, so I'm going to slide in here to another piece of kind of what you mentioned about Vickers, which is the bridge, what you call bridge financing, right? Yes. And so I think a lot of churches hear this and they're thinking, okay, that's great, and the money back is great, but like, geez Louise, like just getting, funding this kind of project, it still feels kind of gargantuan. So talk to us about the feasibility of bridge financing and getting help, and maybe how Vickers kind of went about that. And
I understand the concerns about complexity, and the community partners that we have. Again, almost all of them are churches or faith-based institutions. Some, choose to do solar with a PPA, with a power purchase agreement. So that's like you're leasing the system. You're getting some of the benefit, but the entity that owns the assets, that owns the solar on your roof and the energy storage next to your facility is sharing in those economic benefits too. To own the asset, like through direct pay, you have to, you're spending the money up front on construction, and then you're getting the money back from the IRS, through that tax credit after the project is already completed. For example, like for Vickers, the project was completed this summer, and that's when it achieved the technical milestone called PTO. It's just, it's when the switch flips to on. And Vickers will file for that tax credit next year in April or May for the 2024 tax year. So they'll get their money back then. What that means, because you're spending the money up front and you're getting the money back after the project is completed via your tax credit, you do need bridge financing. So, 18 to 24 months of construction loans, essentially, to get you to the value of that tax credit. And I know for some churches and faith-based institutions, that can be a little intimidating, may not want to take on that debt. But I want to share a little bit about 2 other resources that faith-based institutions, houses of worship, churches around the country have, and that there is much more coming. And it's also in the IRA. There's so much in the IRA. We could spend all day talking about it. But it's another program called the GGRF, because it's not energy if it's not an acronym. The GGRF, it's the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. And it's a program of the EPA. And in total, it's $27 billion. And that $27 billion, it is specifically to support green banks. So basically just low-cost lending for projects like these. for community-based financing. So supporting local CDFIs, community development financial institutions. So very, very localized financial institutions that are all about small dollar lending to community-based organizations. And then also for supporting Solar for All programs, which I want to share a little bit with you about as well, because it's a wonderful way for communities of faith that have a little extra roof to share, a little extra land. You can produce more energy that you need. It's a wonderful way for you to share even more with your neighbors, to share power with your neighbors too. But all of that, the $27 billion in the GGRF that's coming from the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, that is all, those are loans, in some cases, additional grants that are there, provided by the IRA for the specific purpose of helping community-based projects like these come to fruition. Groundswell, we got a lot of hustle, so we figured out how to put the financing and funding together for the Vickers project last year before, anything but direct pay was available. Mm-hmm. But it's going to be so much easier, for organizations that are just getting going now. And those GGRF funds, there are programs in every single state. There are programs that are specific for tribal communities, programs that are specific for U.S. territories like Puerto Rico and Guam. So no matter where you are, you've got a service provider locally. And those dollars are going to begin to be available probably towards the end of this year and the beginning of next year. So if you're putting together your vision, if you're saying, okay, well, I can put 200 kilowatts on my roof, and I need a battery that's going to last me for 2 days, and this is about how much it's going to cost, and this is about the loan that I would need, to get me to my tax credits. You're going to be able to knock on the door of one of these green banks and find what you need.
Okay. Wow.
So it's an environment of abundance. There's some complexity, there's definitely some complexity, but we are just operating in an extraordinary environment of abundance that is nothing like I've experienced in my 30 years in this field.
I feel like, so the overarching thing that I'm learning here is that I'm going to say in America, the green light has been lit for advancing, particularly quote unquote, green energy infrastructure, and the government just wants to see this happen as much as possible, and so that's kind of all the working together, different departments and things, and so when we're talking about bridge financing, you're saying like, hey, just be on the lookout because there's more money coming that will help you borrow from Peter to pay Paul, kind of situation to see that, in this situation, solar battery project happen. Mm-hmm. So that's okay.
Absolutely. And I can share a specific example with you. And again, this is a leading example, right? This is an example from this past year that shows you how things can work as we go forward into this very abundant future together. So another resiliency project that Groundswell built, as I shared, is with City of Refuge in Baltimore. And it's also energy and battery storage, or solar and battery storage, about the same cost as the project at Vickers. The total cost is about $600,000, give or take. It's also going to save thousands of dollars a month on the electricity bill, get rid of, the utility bill essentially. And there we partnered with Rochdale Capital. And Rochdale Capital is led by a gentleman named John Holtwaw, and it is a community-based lender. One of their 4 pillars is clean energy, and they are all about enabling community ownership. So they loan to a lot of co-ops, like real local-based organizations too. And they were able to provide that bridge financing at, I think Pastor Billy said 4.5% interest, which is way, way less. It's way, way less than what you would pay in a market rate scenario too. So it's conciliatory lending essentially. Because again, it's about our values. It's values aligned, like clean energy, community ownership, and enabling community-based organizations like churches and houses of worship to have all the nice things too. Because the Googles, the Walmarts, the giant corporations of the world, they have been able to do this for a really long time and make it pencil, which is great. They've really helped to build markets and bring costs down and everything. And now these wonderful tools from the Inflation Reduction Act mean that all of us can do it. And we can bring it to the neighborhood. And then we can bring it to the people who need these solutions the most.
That's great. One of the things that I remember kind of hearing in the room that there might have been a little confusion of when we had this meeting where back in DC, is there's this sort of quote unquote, if your project qualifies language. And I think that word threw some folks off in our meeting because I don't think it came across the way maybe it was meant. But just to clarify, in your experience, is there a scenario in which a church, right, installs these listed options, puts in solar, and something about it doesn't qualify for these rebates? Does that make sense?
If you're building a solar project, it qualifies. If you're building a solar project, it qualifies for the tax credits, period.
Okay.
There's a, from a paperwork perspective, the U.S. Treasury and the IRS has a pre-filing process that you go through. It's sort of like, hey, we're doing this is coming your way. And they're like, okay, we'll be on the lookout for it. But if you're building a solar project, you're going to qualify for the tax credit, no question. And for the bonus tax credits now, if you're building a project that shares power with your low-income neighbors, if you're building a project in a disadvantaged or an environmental justice community, if you're building a project in an energy transition community, and you're eligible for those 10% adders, is the terminology, bonus tax credits or adders, you do have to apply for those. But I will tell you, we have worked with several partners, including Community Church Atlanta, City of Refuge, and others to apply, for the bonus tax credits. It is a very easy process, and the IRS lets you know very quickly. They don't commit to a specific time frame now, but in fact, we've heard within 2 months of each filing to say, thumbs up, we have allocated this additional 10% to you. So before you install the first solar panel, if you're going to have access to the additional tax credits on top of the 30% solar tax credit or ITC.
That's really helpful just to kind of clarify. And also, again, hear that like if you're doing this ministry and this work in a place that really needs it, there are some bonus tax credits.
Yes.
So I think that's super encouraging. So real quick, as it was sort of given to us, and I thought this was a helpful 1, 2, 3, 4 of the application process that, they sort of threw on the screen, which involves, and feel free to interject, which was 1, identify your project, pursue contractors, pursue that funding, if you're pursuing that bridge, looking for those loans and bridge funding. 2, complete your project, however long that takes, right? This could be months, this could be years. 3, which you just mentioned, complete the pre-filing with the IRS, ideally a few months before your tax day. And again, just to clarify, this can be new territory for churches who typically don't navigate this process because they don't owe federal income tax. And so it's a little bit of a learning curve. But also, we've been told that these are, quote, easy forms and you don't need a tax accountant.
That is correct. They are very straightforward.
So that's crazy encouraging for someone like me. And then 4th and finally, file that tax return, which is a 990T form. This is all on the website, right? And then, boom, sit back and wait for your check.
That is it. It is that simple. And there are so many organizations out there, that are working to make it even simpler. There are, I'm hoping I'm remembering their names correctly. I think it's Lawyers for the Public Good. And they just put out this big online toolkit about using direct pay. And it probably demystifies a lot for people and has some really practical applications in it. Groundswell, we publish case studies, we host webinars on the regular, so that people can hear from their peers, building similar projects about how it went for them, what some of their questions were and what some of their ways are that they are leveraging those projects too. And there are many others. As we see these Solar for All programs come online around the country, we will all have even more resources to go to. In fact, I'll share, Caleb, that Groundswell is a Solar for All recipient as well. So we were blessed to receive $156 million award from EPA for our Southeast Rural Power Coalition. And we're going to be funding, we're going to be providing, financial assistance to help build more than 100 megawatts of community solar projects across the Southeast. And our goal is to cut energy bills in half for at least 17,000 households across the region. And that's in Arkansas, Mississippi, Alabama, my home state of Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Central Southern Virginia, and North Central Florida. And one of the ways that churches and houses of worship can participate in Solar for All programs like ours or the many others that are out there, there's 60 Solar for All programs getting ready to launch around the country. No matter where you live, there is a Solar for All program that will be serving you. You could, for example, build enough solar on your roof so that half of that solar goes to reduce the church's electricity bill, and then half you can share with low-income families in your neighborhood. So it's a very direct and very literal way to share power with other people in the community. And when I think about, I think about my parents' Sunday school class when I was growing up, they always, collected dollars to help people pay bills that they couldn't pay, the benevolence fund, the adult Sunday school class at the Methodist Church in LaGrange, Georgia. And, churches everywhere are doing this already. But when you're using the money to pay for somebody's electricity bill, you're helping them in a meaningful way that month, but they may end up in the same situation again, just because making ends meet is a challenge when your family is getting by on a very modest income. Sharing solar from your roof is sustaining. It's a little nest egg for that family. And it's a little nest egg around which you can build other opportunities like energy efficiency. Maybe someone in that family can get a job or get trained in the energy sector for solar or for working at their local utility, and be able to ladder up, to a healthier, more sustainable, more thriving life. So many, many beautiful ways to participate that are just beginning to come online, and that we will all have access to be a part of no matter where we live.
Wow. Thank you, Michelle. That's encouraging, and it's helpful, and it's practical. It's all the things. And yeah. And one thing, and we only really hit on it a little bit, but just to reiterate, when you do one of these projects like this, you're getting, like you mentioned that Vickers now gets like $7,000 a year back. Yeah, like this is money that you keep getting back year after year because of your savings. And like that is money, like you said, like they're feeding hundreds of people. I know I've heard churches like giving school supplies, and like you can just put this money to work. You can you can do things. And so yes, so that's also just to think about for if you're kind of on the fence out there. But yeah, any last word you'd like to share with our listeners before we kind of tie this up?
Thank you so much for that. And I would just encourage everyone to, don't be intimidated by the technology and the complexity or the tax filings. A solar project or a resilience project with solar and storage starts like any other project, just like if you were renovating your kitchen or your bathroom. You just look at what's the potential, so given the size of my roof or the size of, that little piece of land next to the church that has never been used, how much solar could I fit on that parcel? How much solar could I fit on that roof? Okay. Do you want to include resilience? All right. Well, how big of a battery do I need to keep the power on or keep the lights on if the power went off? And then once you know how much solar and how much battery, you can put a cost on it. And then once you can put a cost on it, then you can start kind of whittling away at that to say, all right, well, how much money could I save? All right, well, how much solar for all grant might I be able to get? What am I going to get back from my tax credits? Can I access one of those bonus tax credits? And then you just kind of whittle away at it, just like you would any other project in your household. And then all of a sudden you have a pathway to fruition. And whether it's an organization like Groundswell, whether it's an organization like IPL, there are many nonprofits around the country that are there to help you figure it out and to connect you to other peers, other colleagues, other people in a very similar situation, the one that you may be in, that can share their stories to help you find a path forward too. But if you haven't begun yet, you are not behind. There are others you can follow, and there are many more resources coming that are just poised right on the precipice of being available to the marketplace. So I would say if you are just beginning to think about a solar project for your church or house of worship, you are right on time.
So good. Thank you, Michelle. This has been such a pleasure to sort of hash out and help me wrap my mind around it and hopefully help others wrap their minds around this. And I think with things like this, it just feels so big and obscure and so foreign. So I hope that this conversation helps people draw this down, and we'll put all the goods in the show notes for people to kind of grab that information at their own pace and take those next steps. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It's been a blessing to be with you today.
Hey, thanks for listening, y'all. I really hope that this conversation is a tool and a resource for your congregation that you can revisit. We've put all these links in the show notes for you, and really this is very accessible information that I hope can be transformative for your community. Grace and peace.